Candace Harris from BoardGameGeek. I'm here with Rainer from Board and Dice, and we're taking a look at Tekhenu, Obelisk of the Sun. Hey, Rainer, how's it going?
Yes. Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I'm still loving Tekhenu. I'm happy to be hosting you today.
Yeah.
Rainer gave me a demo of this beautiful game a couple weeks ago, and then kindly sent me a copy of it. And I've played, about 5 or 6 times now. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
um,
That's great. That was a
yeah,
lot of fun.
yeah, totally. Can you give us an overview of Tekhenu and tell players what they'll be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a Gen Con release. So basically, it's going to be available now, and it's we always do global releases. So even though it's a Gen Con release, that still means that people elsewhere around the globe are still able to get this from their local stores and so forth. So this game is a co-design between Daniela Tassini and David Turtzi. And it is set in the time of what's modern day Karnak at Luxor, Egypt, when the Temple of Amun Ra was being built, as well as the area that they ended up calling Ipet Isut. And in the game, we basically represent nobles in ancient Egypt, and we will be drafting dice to perform different actions. And during the course of the game, basically, we only have 16 turns, which doesn't sound like a lot, but each turn, every action that you take is really impactful. One of the main features of the game is the obelisk that is in the center of the game board. And as you can see, there are 6 different action areas around that obelisk. And those are represented different gods and different actions that you can take during the game. Now you can also see how that obelisk that Nikki held up, there's a little disc around it, and there are several symbols on there. And basically that disc is divided into different shaded areas. So there are 2 areas that are on the right side of the obelisk that represent that they are in the sun. So those are light areas. On the opposite side, that side is in the dark, representing the shadow that is being cast by the obelisk. And then on either side of the obelisk, you have some shaded areas. And what will happen during the game is that there are 5 colors of dice that you will be drafting, and the colors of those dice, depending on if that color die is currently in the light or in the dark or in the shadows, that will change if the die is considered pure, tainted, or forbidden. So that will change which dice you have access to. It will change sometimes how you evaluate which action you want to take, because you're trying to maintain a balance between your actions. You want to have a balanced scales. So you can see on the player boards, for example, there's a set of scales on them. So every time that you draft a die, you will be placing, if you took a pure die, for example, you'll be placing it on the left side, on the pure side. When you take a tainted die, on the other side. But as the game goes on, every 2 turns, that shadow around the obelisk is going to rotate. So that would constantly change which dice you have access to and how you evaluate which actions you want to take. So I can show a couple of sample turns just so that people can get a feel for how the game plays. So right now, this basically represents the setup of the game. So you at the beginning of the game, you're going to have 3 different dice that are in each of those 6 action areas. And if you could maybe show me just a larger overview so that I can see the dice a little bit better.
Nice.
Thank you. So let's say that in this case we have the orange and the purple player, and they have all received certain resources at the beginning of the game. And let's start with, for example, the purple player. So that the purple player is currently first in turn order, as you can see by the turn order track that is in the middle of the right side. The purple player during setup, they were able to start with a technology that gives them a benefit every time that they perform a certain action. So in this case, this one says, okay, whenever you perform a Horus God action, you gain 2 victory points and 1 granite. And this is actually a resource that you can take and to help pay for the cost of that action. So let's say that the purple player on their turn, they can now draft a die from that upper left around the 10 o'clock area. That's the Horus God action area. So let's say that they would take the brown 2 that is up there. So that is currently a tainted die. So that die would go on the right side of the scales, and now they're able to place out a statue. That's what that action does. The first statue that you build will cost you 4 granite. And they do have some resources there, so that they're able to pay for it. And even if you don't have the exact resources as far as the 4 that are in the game, so there's papyrus, bread, granite, and limestone, you can also use gold as a wild resource if you need to. Now, because the purple player took this action with a 2, they can build that statue in one of the other areas around the obelisk. So they could build it in the Hathor God action area, which is on the opposite side around the 2 o'clock position. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, that one. Because from now on, when another player takes that action, they will now get a benefit every time and be able to basically piggyback off of other actions that are taken. Now let's go over to the orange player's turn. So they also started with some resources, and they would like to actually construct a building. And unfortunately, because of the bread that they have, the purple player knew that they were probably going to place a building around the temple complex, which is in the upper right corner. So to construct a building, you will pay a number of bread, and it's between 2 and 4, depending on which space you're putting it at. The more bread you pay, the bigger the immediate payout is in the resources that you gain. So they will go ahead and pay those 4 bread, and they will take the leftmost building from their player board and can now place that building on the middle spot on the bottom row, for example.
It would be
down
outside
on the
that
building row on the outside.
Further.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Now,
cool.
when you can construct a building, first of all of those spaces within the temple complex that depict different resource icons, now the orange player would receive one of each of those. So they would get a bread and a papyrus, a gold, a limestone, and a granite. So this is a good source of victory points for constructing a building. Now, unfortunately, because the purple player had their statue in that area, they will now also receive a bonus. So in the upper left corner, it shows, okay, if someone performs a certain action, what benefit do they get from that? And in this case, the Hathor action shows that they would get a scribe. So this is a way of piggybacking off of the different actions that are taken. Now, the orange player also receives a bonus. They will get to advance their population marker by an amount equal to the value of the die that they took. So if they would take the 5 from here, for example, then they would get 5 extra population. Whereas if they took the 3, everything else about that action remains the same, but then they only get 3 population. So maybe they took the 5 there, which was a pure die, and goes on the pure side of their scales. Now it would be back to the purple player's turn. They still have some granite left over, so they can go ahead and place another statue. I forgot also that they do have that technology that I mentioned earlier, so they would actually have scored victory points for the first statue as well. And now they would be able to still build another statue, and the next statue would only cost 3, so they get progressively cheaper at the beginning, but then they get more expensive again at the end. In building another statue, they could again build in one of the action areas, but they could also go ahead and place it in either one of the 2 statue spaces around the temple complex, or maybe in the Osiris action area above the districts that are there. And after basically at some point the players are starting to develop. You start to say, okay, the purple player, they're probably going to be building a lot of statues, right? How can I then, if I'm the orange player, how can I decide which actions I'm taking so that I'm not benefiting them as much for their statues? And at the same time, if I'm the purple player, I will look at, okay, well, what resources do they have? Well, the orange player has a lot of papyrus, for example. Maybe they want to take either the Bastet action to increase the happiness of their people, or maybe they would like to acquire some cards and so forth. So let's say that on the orange player's turn, they might, for example, take now the Thoth action area, which is at the bottom there. Now there are a couple of dice that are available there. There's a 6 and a 4, and the 1 is forbidden. Depending on the value of the die that you take in this area, that will determine how many cards you get to take. And as you can see at the bottom of the player board or of the game board, there are different cards that are laid out. The white cards, those are blessings. They're one-time use, so they usually provide a really powerful one-time benefit during the game. Whereas the yellow colored cards, those are technologies similar to the technology that we saw the purple player using before. They will give different benefits and victory points or other bonuses when they're being used. The red cards, which don't come out at the beginning of the game, but they come out later during the game, those provide different end game scoring options. So, Nikki, if you would flip over those cards, we can look at some of these examples.
Right.
So let's start with the leftmost one. That one is just a one-time benefit of being able to either get population or happiness. Getting the population really only acts as a limit for how high your happiness can go. But your happiness is very important because that drives, first of all, that's a source of victory points. If you have a very happy population, you can get victory points, and later in the game, you can also get certain bonus actions and so forth. But also, the happier your people are, this will give you more choices when you're taking these cards from the card market. Now, the next card that you see here, so this one says when you receive a Horus bonus, and that's similar to the bonus that we saw that the purple player received for placing their statues. If they had this card, that would allow them to also gain granite every time that they get that bonus from their statue. It now kind of building an engine for them of different bonuses. The card on the right there, so the decree, these are end game scoring objectives. And at the beginning of the game, everyone's going to start with one of them. And this one is an example of what those might look like. Basically, they will give you victory points for certain actions that you have conducted during the game. Things that you've built, it could be, in this case, it's for every statue that you built, regardless of whether you built it around the obelisk in those god action areas or by the temple complex in the Osiris action area. And also for building pillars within the temple complex. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can score points from these decrees. It could be based on buildings that you have constructed. It could be based on leftover resources. Normally, leftover resources and so forth are not worth anything at the end of the game, but if you get the right card for that, that could be a good source of victory points. Now,
Rainer,
one thing to remember, if you put back that one of those red colored decrees again, is so if you look at the top there, so there's a symbol on the right, and you see these cards that are there. They have now different symbols on them. At the end of the game, you can score up to 3 of these decrees, but they have to have different symbols. So it's very difficult to get ones that are basically you can't easily double up on different on the same thing, right? So you have to make sure that you're planning so that you have a bit of a varied strategy during the game. Otherwise, basically, after the players have taken 2 of their actions, which now we'd seen 2 examples of actions, that's when the shadow around the obelisk would rotate. So it would rotate 1 step clockwise. And every time that there is a rotation, that's when we add more dice to the newly shaded areas. We have to adjust which dice are pure and tainted and forbidden. Right. And after we have drafted 4 dice, that's when we have to, there will be a Maat phase. And Maat was the goddess of justice and balance in Egypt. That's where you have to account for the actions that we have taken during the game. So as you can see, I mean, there's quite a bit going on, and of course, you Candice, we played this on Tabletopia. You've had a chance to play it since then. It's definitely a game when you sit down and first look at it. There's a lot of information going on, right? But at the same
Right,
time,
right,
once you've played a few rounds, then you will notice that, okay, everything is very self-contained, right? So for example,
right,
when you're building a statue, you're only focused in that upper right corner of the board. When you're constructing
right,
a building, you're only looking at that the right side of the board, right? Everything is
right.
very self-contained and consistent when it comes to the iconography and so forth.
Yeah, and I like how the board is laid out so that everything is right where you actually go. Where you're
Yep.
drafting the die is where you're actually taking the action. Um, I thought that was really good. Like once you explained it, it was like, oh, this all makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
But it's also I find a game where there's so many different things that you can do. So especially when you're new at it, I would recommend trying to like maybe kind of build your strategy off your starting decree card because then
Mm-hmm.
it gives you something to work towards. Like if you had that one that Nikki showed at first, where it said, for every 2 points per statue and pillar you have in the temple complex, it's like, well, you might want to try to like focus a bit on there because those decree cards, when this end game scoring kicks in, make a big difference. All of
Yeah.
the cards are awesome. I found like whether you have the tech cards, the one-time use cards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought that was great. Another thing you might want we could probably talk about is just above the card row is where Rainer had mentioned you're going to manage your happiness and your population.
Mm-hmm.
So the population is kept track of by the larger meeple, and then the
Yep.
tiny meeple is your happiness. So your happiness can never exceed your population. They're adorable. um, but when you're going to get cards from the bottom, and I don't remember the exact god's name down there.
Mm-hmm.
But when
Yes,
you're
it's
doing the
Thoth
grab
is that god, yeah.
Sloth, yes. When you're taking the card action, you can only grab cards from a section where your happiness level is up to. So, Nikki, if you
Sure.
could move, like, let's say the purple big meeple up, maybe like 10 steps higher, and then yeah, you just estimate just when it starts hitting the blue area. Yeah. So now you can increase your happiness and get it up that high. And the minute you get it up to, like, say, the blue section, you're able to access cards in the blue
Mm-hmm.
section. And there are more decree cards there. So that's like one angle you could try to, boost your happiness and try to
Yep.
get up there. But yeah, there's a lot there's a lot going on and a lot you can do. But maybe we should talk about the how the Maat phase works and the balancing of the scales.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, when you are balancing your scales, every die that you have drafted up until that point. So you will, at this point when we do the Maat phase, you will have 4 dice on your player board, and you will count the pip values for everything that is on the pure side, and you will balance that against everything that is on the tainted side, and then you'll get basically an overall balance. So maybe you had a total pip value of 11 on the left side and you had 10 on the right side. Well, that means that your overall balance, because you're slightly more in favor of on the pure side, so now your overall balance is 1, right?
Right.
Now you might say, okay, well, why do I care about my balance? Well, to be honest, the balance itself is a small aspect of what you have to consider. Basically, if you have an imbalance on the pure side, there's no drawback, there's no penalty for it. You just took a
Right.
lot of pure actions. On the tainted side, a little bit of imbalance, not a big deal. There's no drawback for that. But once you start getting a little bit more, so between 3 and 5, then you start losing victory points. 6 to 8, you
Right.
lose now 2 victory points. 9 no more, you lose 3 victory points. Those victory points, they don't necessarily hurt that much. They're a little bit, especially if you do that a lot. Well, that can be
Right.
a significant number of victory points. But what happens at the end of the Maat phase, when everyone has said, okay, this is my balance, this is where my scales are at, now the player that was the most balanced, they will go first in turn order for the following 4 rounds. And that is
Right.
a big deal because if you,
Yes.
this will happen every single time there will be, okay, I have everything planned. I need to take that die. Oh, and Candace, you took the only die that I cared about because you also wanted to take that action, and you were
Yeah,
before me in turn order. I mean, that happened
right,
several times when we played it. It's going
right,
to happen, and being able to plan for and trying to foresee what might the other players do, being able to use the scribes that you have, because the scribes that can be used to mitigate the dice that you're
right.
taking. In fact, if you have two scribes, you can take an Anubis action, which allows you to take any die from anywhere and do any action you
Even
want with
forbidden
it.
ones. Yeah,
Yep, including forbidden ones. And being able to plan that and that puzzle of trying to say, okay, I need to make sure that I don't waste my resources, and I need to make sure that I have the right the number of scribes that I need, and making sure that I leave some options so that, okay, in case you take a die that I wanted,
right,
maybe this other one will be good, and trying to balance my scales at the same time. I mean, that's where it's by themselves. It's not a lot. Each decision is
yeah,
fairly simple that way, but it's when you're putting it together and that puzzle of trying to do it, because and especially over
right.
16 actions, trying to make sure that you
Yeah,
every time draft the right die, right?
and every time we get to that halfway point in the game, and it's like, okay, we're moving along. Next thing you know, it's like we only have two more dice to get.
Yep.
I feel like the ending always like sneaks up on you, so you really do have to plan and think
Yeah.
ahead a
It's
bit.
always a game where I wish I had one or two more turns, right? Because you cannot do, not only can you not do everything, you can't even do everything that you wish you could do. So if even if it's okay,
Yeah,
I'm just going to focus, I'm just going to build in the Osiris action area and around the temple. That's the only thing I'm going to do. I will still need a turn or two at the end of the game because I needed that one more pillar. I needed that one more
yeah.
thing. So, and especially
That's
like you were
again
saying,
why.
yeah. Well, and especially like with the different cards that you're taking, all of the blessings and the technologies, they're so useful, so helpful.
Yeah,
But am I now going to take one of my turns to go and
and
get that
do that.
card? Is that going to
Right,
pay
right.
off? And then I want to take the. I should really build a pillar first, because then when I put down a building, I will get victory points for that pillar.
Points,
I mean,
right.
it's yeah, and
Well, thanks, Rainer.
it's one. Yeah, it has done really well for us. I mean, it's definitely been an exciting game to demo,
Yeah,
and been very well received. So we're very excited about this.
I can vouch for that. I've been loving it. So we only have a couple more minutes left. There was one
Yep.
question in the chat about when will the pre-orders be shipped for Tekhenu?
So basically, the games have arrived in the United States. So they're basically going through our distributor right now. They should be shipped out. You should be receiving it in the next week or two. Any of the pre-orders.
Cool.
So
Cool. Well, thank you again, Rainer. That's
yeah, thank
Tekhenu
you.
from Board and Dice. Uh, go get it because it's super fun.